Some moments change everything. Catherine Williams never imagined that her quiet dedication to helping others would catch the attention of royalty itself. At 44, when most people settle into predictable routines, she found herself standing before one of the highest honors in the realm. This is the extraordinary true story of an ordinary woman whose compassionate heart led to an extraordinary recognition that would forever change not just her life, but the lives of countless others she had touched along the way. What started as simple acts of kindness in her small community would eventually reach the very halls of power, proving that sometimes the most profound impact comes from the most unexpected places. Catherine Williams woke up that Tuesday morning in November with no idea that her life was about to change forever. The autumn sun filtered through her kitchen window as she prepared her usual breakfast of toast and tea, the same routine she had followed for the past 15 years since moving to the small village of Millbrook. At 44, she had found a comfortable rhythm in her life, working as a primary school teaching assistant during the day and spending her evenings helping neighbors with various tasks that had somehow become her unofficial responsibility in the community. The phone call came at exactly 9:47 a.m., just as Catherine was finishing her second cup of tea before heading to Millbrook Primary School. The voice on the other end was formal, precise, and completely unexpected. "Miss Williams? This is David Hartwell from the Cabinet Office. I'm calling regarding a matter of some importance that requires your immediate attention." Catherine nearly dropped her mug. The Cabinet Office? She racked her brain, trying to think of any reason why such an important government department would be calling her. Had she forgotten to pay some tax? Was there an issue with her teaching credentials? "I'm sorry," she managed to say. "I think you might have the wrong person. I'm just a teaching assistant in Millbrook." Miss Catherine Williams of 42, Elm Street, Millbrook, Gloucestershire. The voice continued with the same formal tone. "Yes, that's me. But I really can't imagine why you'd be calling. Miss Williams, I'm calling to inform you that you have been selected to receive an honor from Her Majesty the Queen. Specifically, you have been awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire for your exceptional services to the community." The words seemed to hang in the air like something from a dream. Catherine sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, her mind completely blank. The Member of the Order of the British Empire? The MBE? She had seen such award announced in the newspapers, but those went to important people, successful business people, celebrities, politicians. Not to someone like her. "I think there's been a mistake," she whispered into the phone. "There is no mistake, Miss Williams. Your nomination was thoroughly reviewed and approved. You should receive formal notification by post within the next few days, but I wanted to call personally to inform you and to emphasize the confidential nature of this information until the New Year Honors List is officially announced." After hanging up, Catherine sat in her kitchen for nearly an hour, staring at the phone and wondering if she had imagined the entire conversation. The idea seemed so ridiculous that she almost convinced herself it had been some sort of elaborate prank. But the man had known her full name and address, and there had been something unmistakably official about his manner of speaking. She was 20 minutes late for work that day, something that had never happened in her 15 years at Millbrook Primary. When she finally arrived, her colleague Sarah noticed immediately that something was different. "Catherine, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Catherine replied automatically, but her mind was still reeling from the phone call. Throughout the morning, as she helped 7-year-olds with their reading and assisted in the art class, she kept replaying the conversation in her head. What could she possibly have done to deserve such recognition? The answer, she knew, lay in the past 5 years of her life, though she had never thought of her actions as anything extraordinary. It had all started quite by accident in 2018, when her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Margaret Foster, had fallen ill with pneumonia. Mrs. Foster lived alone, and her only son lived in Australia. Catherine had simply begun checking on her daily, bringing her groceries and helping with household tasks. Word spread quickly in Millbrook, as it does in small communities. Soon, Catherine found herself being approached by other neighbors who needed various forms of assistance. There was Mr. Thompson, a widower in his 80s who struggled with technology and needed help setting up online banking. There were the Henderson twins, both in their 70s, who needed someone to drive them to medical appointments since neither had ever learned to drive. What started as occasional favors gradually became a more organized effort. Catherine began keeping a notebook of who needed what kind of help and when. She coordinated with other willing neighbors to ensure that everyone who needed assistance received it. She organized shopping trips for those who couldn't get to the stores easily, set up an informal meal delivery system for people recovering from illnesses or surgeries, and even started a small community garden where elderly residents could grow vegetables together. The breakthrough moment had come 2 years earlier, when the local council announced budget cuts that would eliminate the community center's meal program for senior citizens. Many of the elderly residents in Millbrook depended on that program not just for nutrition, but for social interaction. Catherine couldn't bear the thought of these people losing both their meals and their primary social outlet. She had never organized anything on such a scale before, but she threw herself into the task with determination that surprised even her. She contacted local businesses, asking for donations of food and supplies. She reached out to churches and community groups seeking volunteers. She spoke at parish council meetings, something she had never done before and which terrified her, but she pushed through her anxiety because she knew how important this was for her community. The result was the Millbrook Community Care Network, an organization that provided not just meals, but a comprehensive support system for elderly and vulnerable residents. What had started as Catherine's informal notebook of neighbors needing help had evolved into a structured volunteer network, serving over 200 people across Millbrook and 3 surrounding villages. Catherine had never sought recognition for any of this work. She had never contacted newspapers or social media to promote what they were doing. She had simply seen people in need and felt compelled to help. The idea that someone had noticed enough to nominate her for a royal honor seemed almost impossible to believe. As the days passed and the formal letter arrived from Buckingham Palace, the reality began to sink in. The letter was printed on heavy, official paper with a royal coat of arms at the top. It confirmed what the man from the Cabinet Office had told her. She was to receive the Member of the Order of the British Empire for services to the community. The letter also contained strict instructions about confidentiality. She was not to tell anyone about the honor until it was officially announced in the New Year Honors list. This presented an enormous challenge for Catherine, who was not naturally secretive and who felt strange keeping such momentous news from the people closest to her. The hardest part was continuing her daily routine as if nothing had changed. She still helped at the school, still coordinated the community care network, still made her rounds checking on elderly neighbors. But now there was a surreal quality to everything she did. When Mrs. Foster thanked her profusely for bringing her weekly shopping, Catherine found herself thinking, "I'm going to meet the Queen because of things like this." The weight of the honor began to affect her in unexpected ways. She started questioning whether she truly deserved such recognition. There were so many people who worked just as hard as she did, who helped just as many people. What made her efforts more worthy than theirs? She also began to feel a new kind of pressure. If she was being recognized for her community service, did that mean she needed to do even more? Should she be expanding the community care network? Should she be taking on additional responsibilities? The honor that should have been purely celebratory began to feel like a burden of expectation. One evening in December, while delivering meals to 3 elderly residents who lived on the outskirts of Millbrook, Catherine found herself thinking about how much her life had changed since that first day she checked on Mrs. Foster. She had gone from being someone who kept to herself, who lived a quiet and unremarkable life, to being someone whose efforts had touched hundreds of lives. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been intentional. Each step had simply led naturally to the next. One elderly neighbor had led to several. Several neighbors had led to a more organized system. A more organized system had led to the community care network. The network had led to recognition from people she had never met, and now to an honor from the highest levels of British society. As she drove home that evening, Catherine realized that the phone call from the Cabinet Office represented more than just recognition for past work. It was a moment that would define the next phase of her life. She was no longer just Catherine Williams, teaching assistant and helpful neighbor. She was becoming something she had never intended to become. A community leader, someone whose efforts had been deemed worthy of royal recognition. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As she pulled in her driveway and looked at her small, ordinary house, she wondered how she would handle this new identity and what it would mean for her future. The quiet life she had built for herself in Millbrook was about to become much more complicated, and there was no going back to the anonymity she had once taken for granted. The New Year Honors List was published on January 1st, and Catherine's name appeared in black and white for the entire world to see. Catherine Mary Williams, teaching assistant, Millbrook Primary School, for services to the community. The words looked strange and formal, as if they were describing someone else entirely. Within hours of the announcement, Catherine's phone began ringing constantly. The first call came from her sister Emma in London, who had seen the news online and was practically shouting with excitement. Then came calls from former colleagues, distant relatives, and neighbors who had somehow missed all of Catherine's community work, but were now eager to congratulate her. The local newspaper wanted an interview. The regional television station wanted to send a camera crew. By the third day of January, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had always been a private person, someone who preferred working behind the scenes rather than being in the spotlight. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to know about her work, her motivations, her background. The postman delivered a stack of congratulatory cards so large that Catherine had to clear off her dining room table just to have space to open them all. The most surprising call came from someone named Jennifer Walsh, who introduced herself as a representative from the Lord Lieutenant's office for Gloucestershire. Catherine had never heard of a Lord Lieutenant, but Jennifer explained that this was the Queen's representative in the county, and that Catherine would need to meet with the Lord Lieutenant's staff to prepare for the actual investiture ceremony at Buckingham Palace. The ceremony typically takes place about 6 months after the announcement, Jennifer explained. You'll receive formal instructions about the date and time, but I wanted to call early to help you understand what to expect and to begin the preparation process. Catherine learned that she would be allowed to bring 3 guests to the ceremony. The choice was more difficult than she had anticipated. Her first thought was her sister Emma, who had always been her closest family member and biggest supporter. But then she thought about Mrs. Foster, who had inadvertently started Catherine's journey into community service. And what about Sarah from the school, who had covered for Catherine countless times when community emergencies had required her attention? The decision-making process made Catherine realize how much her life had changed over the past 5 years. Her circle of meaningful relationships had expanded far beyond her family to include dozens of people in the community whom she now considered close friends. The elderly residents she helped weren't just neighbors anymore. They had become like honorary grandparents. The volunteers who worked with the Community Care Network weren't just collaborators. They had become a chosen family. As winter turned to spring, Catherine found herself navigating a new kind of life. The MBE announcement had brought unexpected opportunities and challenges. She was invited to speak at community events in neighboring towns and cities. Local charities asked her to serve on their boards. Business owners wanted to discuss partnerships with the Community Care Network. Most significantly, the County Council approached her about expanding the community care model to other rural communities throughout Gloucestershire. What had started as Catherine's informal notebook of neighbors needing help was now being studied as a potential template for addressing social isolation and support needs across a much wider area. The opportunity was exciting, but also daunting. Catherine had never thought of herself as someone who could work on a county-wide scale. Her strength had always been in personal relationships, in knowing individual people and their specific needs. The idea of expanding to help thousands of people she would never meet personally felt like a completely different kind of challenge. The training sessions with the Lord Lieutenant's office were unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. She learned about royal protocol, about how to address members of the royal family, about the history and significance of the Order of the British Empire. She practiced walking in a straight line while wearing formal clothes and learned the proper way to curtsy. The curtsy was particularly challenging for Catherine, who had never been graceful or comfortable with formal gestures. She practiced in her living room, feeling ridiculous as she bent her knees and lowered her head to an imaginary monarch. The whole concept of bowing to another human being felt strange to someone who had always believed that all people were fundamentally equal in value and dignity. But as she learned more about the history of the honor she was receiving, Catherine began to understand its significance differently. The Order of the British Empire had been created to recognize people who might not otherwise receive recognition for their contributions to society. It was specifically designed to honor individuals like teachers, nurses, volunteers, and community workers whose efforts might not make headlines, but who made essential contributions to the fabric of society. Understanding this context helped Catherine feel more comfortable with the attention she was receiving. She wasn't being honored because she was better than other people, but because her work represented something valuable that society wanted to acknowledge and encourage. The honor wasn't just about her individual efforts. It was about recognizing the importance of community service and mutual support. As the date for the investiture ceremony approached, Catherine found herself experiencing a mixture of excitement and anxiety that she had never felt before. The practical preparations were challenging enough. She had to buy appropriate formal wear, something she had never owned and wasn't sure how to choose. She had to arrange time off from school, coordinate coverage for her community care network responsibilities, and make travel arrangements for herself and her 3 guests. But the emotional preparations were even more complex. Catherine kept thinking about all the people who had contributed to her receiving this honor. Mrs. Foster, who had trusted a relative stranger to help her during her illness. Mr. Thompson, who had patiently taught Catherine about the challenges facing elderly people trying to navigate modern technology. The Henderson twins, who had shown her how much difference reliable transportation could make in someone's quality of life. There were also the volunteers who had joined the community care network, people who had given their time and energy to help others without any expectation of recognition or reward. Catherine felt almost guilty about being singled out for honor when so many others had contributed equally to the work being recognized. The night before leaving for London and the investiture ceremony, Catherine sat in her living room surrounded by the congratulatory cards and letters she had received. Some were from people she knew well, neighbors, and colleagues who had worked alongside her. Others were from complete strangers who had heard about her work and wanted to express their appreciation. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a woman named Patricia Stevens, who lived in a village about 30 miles from Millbrook. Patricia explained that her own mother had been isolated and struggling until a neighbor, inspired by reading about Catherine's community care network, had started a similar support system in their village. Patricia's mother was now receiving regular visits, help with shopping, and had even made new friends through the community garden that the neighbor had organized based on Catherine's model. "I wanted you to know," Patricia wrote, "that your work has helped people you've never met in places you've never been. The idea of neighbors helping neighbors is spreading because of what you started in Millbrook." Reading this letter helped Catherine understand something important about the honor she was about to receive. The MBE wasn't just recognizing her individual efforts. It was recognizing an approach to community building that could be replicated and adapted in countless other places. Her work in Millbrook had become a catalyst for similar efforts elsewhere, creating a ripple effect of positive change that extended far beyond what she had ever imagined possible. This realization shifted Catherine's perspective on the ceremony she would attend the next day. Instead of feeling like she was being honored for something she had done alone, she began to see herself as representing all the people who choose to help their neighbors, who build community connections, who believe that everyone deserves support and dignity. The MBE would officially belong to her, but in a deeper sense, it belonged to everyone who had contributed to the work being recognized. It belonged to Mrs. Foster for trusting her, to the volunteers who had joined the network, to the elderly residents who had allowed her to help them, and to all the other communities that were now adapting her model to meet their own needs. As Catherine packed her suitcase for the trip to London, she felt a sense of calm settling over her anxiety. Tomorrow, she would meet the Queen and receive one of the highest honors that British society could bestow. But more importantly, she would be participating in a tradition that recognized and celebrated the countless ways that ordinary people contribute to making the world a better place. The morning of the investiture ceremony dawned clear and bright in London. Catherine had barely slept in her hotel room, her mind racing with anticipation and nerves. She had practiced her curtsy one final time before bed, rehearsed what she might say if the Queen spoke to her, and checked her formal outfit multiple times to make sure everything was perfect. Her sister Emma then knocked on her door at 7 in the morning, bubbling with excitement. "I can't believe this is actually happening," Emma said as she helped Catherine with her hair. "My little sister is going to meet the Queen." Catherine looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the formal, polished woman looking back at her. The navy blue dress and matching jacket were more elegant than anything she had ever owned. The small hat with its delicate veil felt foreign on her head. She looked like someone who belonged in a palace, not like the teaching assistant from Millbrook who helped elderly neighbors with their shopping. The journey to Buckingham Palace was surreal. Catherine sat in the taxi with Emma, Mrs. Foster, and Sarah from school, watching London pass by outside the windows. The city seemed to sparkle in the morning sunshine, as if it too were dressed up for the ceremony. When the taxi turned onto the Mall, and Catherine caught her first glimpse of Buckingham Palace at the end of the tree-lined avenue, she felt a thrill of amazement that she was really here, really about to walk through those famous gates. The security process of the palace was thorough but courteous. Catherine and her guests were directed to different areas. She would join the other honor recipients while Emma, Mrs. Foster, and Sarah would be seated in the ballroom to watch the ceremony. Before they separated, Mrs. Foster took Catherine's hands in her own elderly ones. "I'm so proud of you, dear," the 85-year-old woman said, her eyes bright with tears. "You've changed so many lives, including mine. You deserve every bit of this recognition." Catherine was escorted to an elegant room where about 50 other people were waiting to receive their honors. She recognized a few faces from newspaper photos, people who had achieved success in business, sports, or entertainment. But most of the recipients looked like ordinary people who had done extraordinary things in their communities, their professions, or their service to others. A palace official explained the ceremony procedure to the group. They would be called forward individually in alphabetical order. Each recipient would approach the Queen, receive their honor, exchange a few words, and then step back and bow or curtsy before leaving. The entire interaction would last only about 2 minutes per person. "The Queen will typically ask you about your work," the official explained. "She's remarkably well informed about each recipient's achievements, so be prepared to answer questions about your specific contributions." As they waited, Catherine struck up conversations with some of the other recipients. There was a nurse from Manchester who had developed innovative programs for elderly patients. A teacher from Scotland who had created after-school programs for disadvantaged children. A businessman from Wales who had donated millions to educational charities while maintaining complete anonymity until his honor was announced. Listening to these stories, Catherine felt both humbled and inspired. Each person in the room had found their own way to make a positive difference in the world. The diversity of their contributions showed her that there were countless ways to serve others and build stronger communities. When her name was called, Catherine felt her heart racing as she walked across the ballroom toward the Queen. The room was magnificent, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and hundreds of people seated in perfect rows. But as she approached the monarch, Catherine's focus narrowed to just the Queen herself. Queen Elizabeth II was smaller in person than Catherine had expected, but her presence was unmistakable. She stood with perfect posture, dressed in a bright blue outfit that complemented the grandeur of the setting. Her expression was warm and alert, and Catherine could see immediately why people spoke of the Queen's ability to make everyone feel like they had her complete attention. "Miss Williams," the Queen said as Catherine approached, "I understand you've been doing remarkable work in your community in Gloucestershire." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Catherine replied, executing what she hoped was an acceptable courtesy. "I've been very fortunate to work with wonderful neighbors and volunteers." As the Queen pinned the MBE medal to Catherine's jacket, she continued the conversation with questions that revealed she had indeed been thoroughly briefed about Catherine's work. She asked about the community care network, about the challenges facing rural elderly residents, and about how Catherine had managed to coordinate so many volunteers. "It sounds like you've created something quite special," the Queen observed. "Community networks like yours are vital for maintaining the social fabric that holds us all together. I believe we all have a responsibility to look after one another, Your Majesty," Catherine replied. "I've been blessed to live in a community where people are willing to help." "Indeed," the Queen smiled, "and you've shown them how their willingness can be channeled most effectively." The exchange lasted exactly the 2 minutes that had been promised, but Catherine felt like she had been given a precious gift. The Queen had not just gone through the motions of a ceremony. She had engaged with Catherine as one person genuinely interested in the work of another. The honor felt personal and meaningful in a way that Catherine had not anticipated. After the ceremony, Catherine and her guests were invited to a reception in another part of the palace. As she moved through the elegant rooms, wearing her new MBE medal and carrying the official citation, Catherine felt like she was living in a dream. Palace staff served champagne and elaborate canapes while recipients and their families mingled in rooms decorated with priceless art and furniture. Mrs. Foster was in her element, chatting with other elderly guests and clearly enjoying every moment of the royal treatment. Emma was taking photos of everything, documenting the day for family members who couldn't attend. Sarah was asking detailed questions about the palace's architecture and history, her teacher's curiosity fully engaged. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself in conversation with other MBE recipients, comparing their experiences and sharing stories about their work. She realized that she was now part of a community that stretched across the entire United Kingdom and beyond, a network of people who had been recognized for their contributions to society. One conversation particularly struck her. She met a man named James Richardson who had received his MBE for developing support programs for military veterans in Northern Ireland. When Catherine described her community care network, James immediately saw parallels to his own work. "The principles are the same," he told her. "You identify people who need support, you organize resources to provide that support, and you build systems to make sure the support continues over time. You're doing social work without calling it social work." This perspective helped Catherine understand her work in a new way. She had never thought of herself as doing anything particularly sophisticated or professional. She had simply seen problems and tried to solve them, seen people in need and try to help them. But James was right. She had been creating and managing social support systems, just without the formal training or professional credentials that usually go with such work. The train journey back to Gloucestershire that evening was quiet and reflective. Mrs. Foster dozed in her seat, exhausted but happy. Emma and Sarah talked quietly about the day's events, still amazed by what they had witnessed. Catherine stared out the window at the darkening countryside, processing what had happened and thinking about what it meant for her future. The MBE medal felt heavier than she had expected, both physically and symbolically. It represented recognition for work she had done, but it also represented expectations for work she might do in the future. The conversations at the palace had given her new ideas about how the community care network could be expanded and improved. She had met people whose own projects could serve as models for additional services in Millbrook and surrounding areas. When the train pulled into the station in Gloucestershire, Catherine was surprised to see a small crowd waiting on the platform. Word had somehow spread about her return from the investiture ceremony, and local residents had come to welcome her home. There were elderly people she had helped, volunteers from the community care network, colleagues from the school, and neighbors she had known for years. As she stepped off the train, still wearing her formal ceremony outfit and carrying the leather box containing her MBE medal, the crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Catherine felt tears in her eyes as she realized that this welcome represented something more than congratulations for an honor received. It represented appreciation for work done and excitement about work still to come. Mrs. Foster, despite her exhaustion from the long day, insisted on saying a few words to the assembled group. Catherine has shown us what one person can accomplish when they truly care about their community, she said in her clear, strong voice. But more than that, she's shown us that we can all be part of something bigger than ourselves when we work together. As Catherine finally made her way home to her small house on Elm Street, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that first morning when Mrs. Foster had needed help. What had started as simple neighborly assistance had grown into something that now had royal recognition and community-wide impact. But more than the recognition or the medal or even meeting the Queen, what moved Catherine most was the realization that her work had created lasting connections between people who might otherwise have remained strangers. The Community Care Network hadn't just provided practical assistance to those who needed it. It had woven new threads into the social fabric of Millbrook and the surrounding villages. Standing in her kitchen that night, looking at the MBE medal on her table and remembering the day's extraordinary events, Catherine understood that receiving the honor was not an ending, but a beginning. The recognition would open new doors, create new opportunities, and bring new responsibilities. At 44, she was entering a new phase of her life, one where her efforts to help others would have an even broader reach and deeper impact than she had ever imagined possible.